As you know, we've always had a pretty shaky relationship with China. I guess it's inevitable. But 2020 proved just how quickly that relationship can deteriorate. Rightly, the Australian government led the charge for an independent inquiry into the coronavirus crisis. Much to the ire, of course, of the Communist Party in China, the retributions were swift, placing tariffs and bans on our farmers and exporters. Well, to counteract, the government's now looking to secure a free trade agreement with India to diversify our export market. As you said earlier, we've got to diversify. But as the National Senator Matt Canavan pointed out earlier, it isn't all doom and gloom for our farmers. After years of drought, we've finally seen a bumper harvest.
It's been a great season, particularly in southern Australia. It has been a little dry up where I am in central Queensland, but we're getting a lot of rain today. That's kept me out of the garden and in the shed, so it's great to see. We need that up here definitely, and we do have a bumper crop. We've got enormous potential to continue to grow our agricultural industry, and the government wants to hit $100 billion of agricultural output by 2030. We're up above $60 billion now. It's up from $50 billion just a few years ago, so we're doing well. Obviously, we'll need to find markets to sell that, because we produce enough food to feed about 100 million people. So, much more than what we could consume here. And we obviously need to find other markets to sell that great produce and get a good return for our farmers.
Well, to that end, of course, China's proving particularly thorny and prickly at this time of the year, and that'll continue into 2021, I have no doubt. The government now starting to look toward India, although they've had a bit of a bumpy track record themselves. I remember, Matt, in 2018, they bunged 60% tariffs on our chickpea exports, which of course affected a number of farmers, particularly in Queensland. They're not complete free trade embraces themselves.
No, and very few countries in the world are when it comes to agricultural output. Obviously, Europe subsidises its farmers to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So does America. And you're right to say India has a track record of protecting its own farmers. We do have a niche market to operate in as Australian farmers, though. As I said before, I think I got my figures slightly wrong. We feed about 60 million people. We want to grow it to 100 million over time. So when you put that in context of Asia, so even if we were to grow our agriculture up to 100 million people a year that we could feed, that's 5 times or so, 4 times now the size of Australia. It's still a very, very small part of Asia, where there's over 2 billion people live, nearly 3 billion people live in our little region here. Yeah. So we're never going to be a producer which replaces farming in other countries. We're not going to put farmers out of business in other countries. We're always going to be producing a high quality product that can feed a niche, particularly as countries grow and middle classes want to express themselves through better forms of protein and food, and also fill some gaps when dry times hit elsewhere. And that's where India's a really interesting partnership for us, because typically when it's wet here in Australia, it can often be dry over in India because of the Indian Ocean dipole effect. So it would make sense for Australia and India to have much closer partnerships on agricultural products, because we could help India fill a gap when it's dry on the subcontinent.
Yeah, it can be complementary, and of course it also ties into that greater geopolitical story, which is going to be very important in dealing with China in the years ahead. Speaking of China, of course, it will be the big bugbear, I would imagine, as we go into 2021. For Queensland, where you're based, obviously coal is of some concern with the export market, but it's not just coal. Recently it's seafood, timber, all sorts of different products have been, wine of course, have been restricted from the Chinese market. How long do you sort of think that this aggression from China concerning trade will continue into the new year?
Look, it doesn't show a sign of stopping, unfortunately, Michael. It would be great to reset things and go back to the way it was 5 or so years ago, when we signed a free trade agreement with China, and the relationship was continually getting stronger, and there was a lot of good prospects for increasing trade between our two countries. Look, since that time, China's made a number of unreasonable demands. They effectively, their own Chinese embassy, put a list of grievances to the Australian media a few weeks ago, some of which included grievances with Australian domestic policy settings, like how we assess foreign investment, or who gets to determine who builds a 5G telecommunications network in this country. Now, clearly, if they're the terms of trade with China, unfortunately, the engagement between the two countries won't be as strong as we expected 5 years ago. Now, look, unfortunately, it doesn't seem like it's going to change the next few months or even year or two.
No, well, it doesn't, does it? But see, the problem, Matt, is that...
Points, if that's the case, we're going to have to find other partners.
Well, that's right. We're going to have to find other partners. But the problem is we've now got 30% of our trade centred on China. And a lot of this I would have thought was quite foreseeable. Doing business to that extent with the communist regime, you do leave yourself open as a government, as a country, as an economy, to being manipulated when you upset them.
Well, that's why, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Michael, and that's why the government has been very strong in developing trade relationships and trade agreements outside of just China. I mentioned the Chinese Free Trade Agreement, but at the same time we work including trade agreements with South Korea, Japan, and the very large Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which has just been finalised. It's a shame India is not part of some of those agreements. We've been trying a free trade agreement there, and I welcome the thoughts of Dan Tan, the new Trade Minister, of refocusing on India. We have tried there before, but it has been difficult. I think, and I would respectfully suggest we should perhaps start with a simpler agreement with India. Going to a full-fledged free trade agreement might be a step too far, but we can take small steps to a better relationship there. So there has been that focus. Of course, the Australian government can't direct businesses where to trade, and the trading opportunities have been so lucrative in China that we have seen a very high uptake of businesses doing business there. But I do think this last year has been a lesson to Australian businesses that there is a risk, as you say, as you put it, there's a risk of doing business with a communist country. You can sometimes have unexpected changes in policy. So we do need to diversify our business relationships across the whole region, not just on one country.
Yeah, one of the big challenges for 2021. Just before you go, one thing governments can do with trade, though, is frame a free trade agreement. And the holy grail at the moment certainly seems, aside from the EU and Britain, India. But, of course, there will be some people, Matt, concerned that a free trade agreement with India doesn't just involve the freer movement of goods, but the freer movement of people, and particularly in areas where there may be already low wage growth. There will be some concern that any free trade agreement with India will allow or necessitate the movement of many more people out of India into Australia much more easily, putting further downward pressure on wages. Is that a concern for you and your electorate?
Oh, look, I can completely understand those concerns, but we heard similar things when we concluded the Chinese Free Trade Agreement. And in that agreement, there were very strong restrictions on how much extra movement of people, as you say, labour could come into our country for the reasons you've outlined. We are not going to undercut Australian wages or working conditions or allow a trade agreement to do that, despite those concerns being commonly aired, especially by the Labor Party and trade unions back in 2015. Those fears did not materialise. We had not seen a rush of Chinese migrants coming to our country, pre-COVID, of course. That did not happen. And likewise, it's not going to happen with India. In saying that, of course, we want to, post-COVID, get back to welcoming highly skilled migrants as we traditionally have done. It would make sense, for as has been happening, for more of that migrant flow to come from India, a country that has a highly educated workforce, speaks a common language to us. It makes a lot of sense. And India, the Indian community is a very well-regarded one within our community, and I'm sure that will continue to grow once our borders open again. But that's not really going to be determined by a trade agreement as such. It's going to be our general migration settings allowing and supporting that. But as you say, we do need to focus on this Indian investment. That's why I was a big supporter of the Adani mine. I mean, thank God that got going. There are all those naysayers there saying we shouldn't do it. Imagine now if we had have blocked that, we'd be in a much weaker position to diversify away from China.